have a super important question to start off the show today, and it goes like this. Yeah. How bored does the devil have to be to go to the middle of nowhere, Georgia, to a crossroads and pick on some hick and say, hey, you want to go to a fiddle contest? Like, yeah. What's going on with the devil that he's got nothing better to do? He's like, you know what? I'm just going to go to Georgia today. I'll test some guy on a fiddle. That's how I'll do it today.
And on a fiddle, no less. I always just assumed the devil was an accordionist. but here he is with a fiddle, and to make himself feel better about whatever lot he's got in life, he's got to challenge this guy to a fiddle contest, and not for nothing, but I don't know that he was all that great.
He didn't bring it. I'm going to be honest. He's had eternity to work on that fiddle playing. He didn't bring it. Johnny beat him.
He kind of deserved to lose.
Yeah. A guy with one tooth beat him. But also, like, what is going on with crossroads in the South Pole? Like, was there nothing to do in the 30s and 40s, so you would just hang out at the crossroads and, like, wait for a wagon to go by and be like, hey, look, there's a wagon. Woo, well, that's my Tuesday. Back to bed for me.
Yeah, it's like there was nothing else on the agenda. That was just it.
So, like, Johnny had nothing going on. The devil had nothing going on. They both had fiddles. They're like, you know what? Let's play for our souls. How about that?
And it's bad enough that the fiddle music wasn't that great, but the lyrics were even worse. I mean, here we go. Here's what we got for lyrics. Fire on the mountain, run boys run, the devil's in the house with the rising sun, chicken in a bread pan picking out dough, granny does your dog bite, no child no. Now, I've heard some crappy lyrics in my time, but that makes no sense to me.
Brad, a lot of that can be explained by fetal alcohol syndrome, I think, is what's going on there. A lot of the lyric writing of most Southern. But also, like, okay, so Johnny wins. He beats the devil, Brad. He beats the devil. He's a better fiddle player than the devil. And what does he get for it? He gets a golden fiddle. What the hell do you do with a golden fiddle?
You can't play a golden
try to go
fiddle.
to a pawn shop in the South with a golden fiddle. They'll be like, I can give you $1 for it all day long. That's all I got. I can't do much with a golden fiddle. Like,
could you imagine how terrible that thing sounds? Plus, it's too heavy. It's too heavy. You've got that thing on your shoulder. It's weighing you down. You're going to walk like on a 45-degree angle for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and that neck is giving you no bow at all. Like, it's not giving you any sort of bounce. So your sound is, you're literally playing tinny music because you're on a gold fiddle. I got to tell you, it's all falling apart. This whole Charlie Daniels song is falling apart when you really see it.
Yeah. He's going to have to give back the millions he made on that album.
And on that note, I'll say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellogg, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the documentary Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab.
And a reminder to everyone that you could be watching us stream live each week as we record the show for our Comic Lab Live Gab friends.
And there's a concurrent chat running alongside the stream where we answer your questions before, during, and after the show.
And if you happen to miss this live stream for Life, Love, or Learning, it is archived each week so you can watch it later.
So do join us over on Patreon. And Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We have a big show for everybody today. A lot of questions, a lot of fun questions to jump right into. And Bradley, what is our first, my friend?
Oh, here's the first question that's going to get us right out of the bat. This comes in from our Comic Lab backer, Mark, who says, I'm not sure if this has been answered before, but has anybody considered OnlyFans as a viable alternative to Patreon? This started off as a joke between my wife and me, but I see professional chefs and motorcycle racers are on OnlyFans, so why not cartoonists? So Dave, when are we going to see a Sheldon Comics OnlyFans?
Well, I'm so happy you asked, Brad. I can announce it now. It's launching Tuesday. Keep an eye out. It's it's going to be a family fun for the whole gang.
That's right.
No, so I have a bigger question to ask you before we even get into this question, Brad. What is a motorcyclist doing on OnlyFans? What is that content? Just slow pans down the oil tank there? What are the gas tank?
A lot of those guys have very pretty feet.
That's very specific. specific. That was a very specific pitch of that joke, Brad. I a little bit feel like you've been to this OnlyFans. I'm not sure.
Well, listen, all that riding and stuff, it builds up those arches very nicely. It's a work of art.
So, okay, so the question here is, could you bring a comic to OnlyFans? Now, do I have your reading correct, Brad, that this didn't sound to me like this was definitively described as an NSFW comic? It sounded like in by them comparing it to a chef or a motorcyclist, it sounds like they're saying this is a little bit broader audience. You know, like this is a, quote unquote normie comic, whatever you want to describe that as, in terms of not being OnlyFans content. So could you do this, I think, is the operative word. And you've described this way better than I have for any time there's a could be question.
Yeah, the question to a could be question, or I'm sorry, the answer to a could be question is always the same. The answer is yes. Could you use OnlyFans as a Patreon alternative? Yes. Could you use a tin can as a Patreon alternative? Also, yes, right? It's up. Could you? Yes. If you find a way to do it, then you could do it, right? There's and it's only up to you to make this thing work. There are a couple of dozen Patreon clones out there, and I wouldn't consider OnlyFans to be a clone, but Patreon also has a number of other entities out there that are trying to do exactly what it's doing. You could use any of these. OnlyFans, right down to the tin cup. You could do any of these. Could you is not the question to ask. The question is why, right? Why are you looking for a Patreon alternative? Right. Why would you go? Well, OnlyFans has. I'm sure it does have a motorcycle rider. I'm sure it does have a chef. But OnlyFans is known for its particular type of content, and which is not safe for work content. It's adult content. And when they tried to get rid of their adult content, all of their user base and all of their creators, for the most part, rejected them. They said, listen, you get rid of them. We'll just find someplace else to go. And OnlyFans reversed that decision within like 24, 48 hours. Their fan base is defined by adult content, for better, for worse. Okay. So the question is, why, if you are doing a safe for work comic, why do you want to go to OnlyFans? When Patreon, by the way, love them or hate them, Patreon has this thing figured out, and they have a huge user base, right? They've got a bunch of people who already have Patreon accounts. Why are you looking for a replacement for something that's working perfectly well? Now, you might have a reason. You might I don't like Patreon because I don't like any company that starts with the letter P, or you don't like the fact that they use orange in their branding, or you could have any other reasons you want. Those reasons are your own. And if you want to go and replace them, then you have that right. And then you go and deal with whatever new problems you're going to find with OnlyFans or the Tin Cup or whatever. But these could you questions always have the same answer. It's yes. The most important question to ask, in my opinion, is why. And for me, from where I stand, I don't see a good reason. Patreon is working really well. Patreon has been solid for years and years and years. And until they give us a reason to start looking someplace else, I'm not sure that it's a great use of our time. Yeah,
I'll reword it slightly differently from how Brad said it. Could you do it? Yes. Should you do it? Probably not. In the sense that network effects have a power in and of themselves. There's a reason why Facebook grew the way it grew, and because it's when all your cousins were on there, your old college buddy was on there, your boss from work was on there, and your softball friends from after work are on there. You join the network because it's much easier to have all the sort of linkages that can happen when the network effect kicks in. That same type of thing is happening for Kickstarter and Patreon to a much smaller degree than it did with Facebook, obviously, but that kind of ecosystem where every creator you've ever heard of probably has a Patreon. Most fans are aware of Patreon. and they probably already have a credit card stored in that system. That's a key one. So when you jumping onto Patreon as a creator, you're already kind of jumping on board to pre-existing network effects that Kickstarter and Patreon have that, frankly, Buy Me a Coffee or Ko-Fi, or I'm trying to think of the other ones, GoFundMe. They have it, but it's just to a far lesser degree. And OnlyFans probably has it too in terms of having a network effect, but it might not be the destination that people were looking for comics for, especially if you are not serving up NSFW comics. It might just be like trying to set up shop in a barber shop and say like, hey, fresh cut steaks. I got fresh steaks here. And people are like, I came to get my hair cut. No, I don't want to buy steaks here. You know, that kind of thing. So it might just be the wrong place, wrong time. And it also just might be a smaller network effect than you would have on Patreon. Although I don't know the numbers involved. Brad, I should have looked that up. Do you happen to know offhand what the user base numbers are for?
This is surprising to me, but I would not have guessed this, but according to a really quick search that I did, it says that OnlyFans has 120 million users. Patreon, their last update said over 8 million patrons.
So I'm going to completely change my answer. I'm now saying bingo on doing only.
No, I'm going to double down. I'm going to double down because it's 120 people who are looking for a very specific thing that you are not offering.
Yeah.
It's a big audience, but it's the wrong audience.
I would argue that that's the case too, unless you have an NSFW comic. Oh, yeah. Brad, just out of curiosity, since this is your world, have you ever looked into this?
I started an account. All kidding aside, just to park my name. I've never posted anything there. But I did start an account just in case I needed to jump to it because it would be a logical jump. And also, there are some subreddits where you can follow creators who are using OnlyFans, and I've been specifically kind of just tracking a lot of those informations to see what I can learn, because I'm learning an awful lot from them, and I'm learning an awful lot from romance writers in terms of how they promote, how they're doing this, how they're doing that. And so I like learning from people in that regard. I also learn an awful lot about how people, and this is just from what I'm picking up here and there, so I don't take this as a read on OnlyFans as a business, but I see time and time again people having trouble getting their money from OnlyFans. Having trouble getting paid all of a sudden because of some mysterious reason. They can't get their money transferred into their account, and these stories pop up often enough that I would really be hesitant to starting anything on OnlyFans, because I hear these stories in these creator communities time and time and time again, and they've got screen grabs, and this is what happened, and I can't get through to anybody, and all this other stuff. So do I have an account there? Yes. Do I hope that I never have to use it because I hear nothing but horror stories? Also, yes. In fact, if it came down to that, the tin cup would also be right up there.
So I had no idea. So it's a little bit of a shady business practices basically sometimes happen.
We can't say that because their legal team, I'm sure, is very much bigger than our legal team. So I will hasten to add, we can't say that. But what I will say is I read these stories over and over again to the extent that it has me concerned.
Right. Okay. Well, let me ask you this. So you've parked a name over there.
Yeah.
Let's just say you put comics up there. Is there like a blogging engine, or what is it? How does it work? I don't know how it works.
I've never, aside from parking my name and putting a header image up, that's as far as I've gone. So gotcha. I really don't have an idea for the interface. I've never gone further than that because I really haven't had to. And one person I was following who was doing NSFW comics there, until a very short while ago. I was just, again, tracking, seeing what they were doing, how they were doing it, so I could pick stuff up. And all of a sudden, in fact, like the last month or so, their post was that they got shut down. They don't know why, and they've lost access to their account.
Oh,
so.
Wow.
So that's when I say that the tin cup is right up there. If my options were between the two, I'm not exaggerating that much. I would actually consider that tin, because at least I know where the tin cup is and I know where I can empty it. I just keep seeing these things pop up over and over again that make me very reticent to put a whole lot of steam behind that engine.
Well, let me advise our question asker then, as someone who knows nothing about how the blogging engine might work over there. I will say that if you were to walk down this path, I would still advise our main bit of advice, which is to own and control your own website.
Yeah.
And be mirroring or syndicating or somehow, copy pasting over to OnlyFans as you would for Patreon, in the sense that if Patreon goes down tomorrow, I have a full archive in Sheldon and Drive and a website that I can then direct people from those sites to, I don't know if I go to Ko-Fi or GoFundMe or whatever the next thing is, it doesn't matter. Because something like that will eventually happen. There will be an enshittification of Patreon at some point, and we will need to redirect. So what I'm getting at here is you're still on firm ground if you build and own and maintain your own website.
Yeah.
Because I think, Brad, even Patreon, when it got started, I think they still say this, which is build your fan base someplace else and then bring them to Patreon, right? Isn't that what their long-term advice was?
That's always been the case with Patreon. And that's why I get a little bit disappointed when I hear people, especially from the Not Safe for Work community, getting so upset because their names don't show up in a search on Patreon. Well, listen, I get that. I would rather have my name show up in a search as well, but I understand why they can't do that. That's all part of what they need to do to position themselves to continue to support Not Safe for Work. So if that's what it takes, it's like the yellow impurity in the Green Lantern ring in the Silver Age. I'm sure Hal Jordan would have liked to use his ring against yellow things, but it was the one thing that he had to kind of give up. And so he went out and used his ring anywhere. So I don't care about being discovered on Patreon. I really don't. My job as a creator of comics is to build my audience on all of the myriad of millions of different ways that I can build an audience, whether it's social media, email notifications, ebooks. There's way too many ways to build an audience, right? I don't care that I don't show up in that search, right? And Patreon has always been pretty upfront about that. They're not about discoverability. Not so much. They do a good college try where they can, and listen, they're in there slugging, but discoverability ain't their strong suit, and I think deep down they kind of know it, right? That's okay. We've only got the rest of the world to work with when it comes to these issues. We've got, if it was the only way to get your name out there, then I would be upset too. But we've got millions of other solutions. And so it's just too easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to do this and then direct them to Patreon.
I do have to say, though, it's fun at the end of this question to just admit my own humility that I was like, I mean, you got to go where the people are. And the network effect of Patreon, and you're like, 8 million people, 120 million people.
Well, again, it shows you the power of adult content. This whole thing that nobody admits that they like. Nobody admits that they might read an adult book. Nobody admits that they might look at a movie, but 120 to 8.
Yeah. I mean, it's also the same kind of thing happens whenever I'm at Costco and you turn I think it's 3.5 rows of alcohol. I'm always like, holy shit, people drink a lot of alcohol. It always boggles my mind how much the sales for alcohol are in this huge Costco store. That's at least a 20th of their sales in terms by physical space is the alcohol rows. Anyway, vices. It turns out it's hard to be a human. Okay. So let me jump us into our next question that comes over from patreon.com/Comic Lab. And this comes in from Mon, who writes, "Hi, Brad and Dave. I've learned enough from Comic Lab to know at least 2 things. Number 1, first comes the crowd, then comes the funding. Good. Number 2, don't ever pay up front for print runs of books. Always crowdfund so you're not putting yourself in a bad place financially. Both of those are very true. I stand by those, Brad. I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah.
So then Mon writes, I have a quaint little following on Instagram, just shy of 450 followers. And I'm just doing this for fun and as a side hustle, not as a full-time job. At least a third of those followers are friends and people from my local Ariel's gym where I attend. And we looked this up. Ariel's gym is sort of a, Brad, how did you describe it when you looked it up?
It's sort of like on Cirque du Soleil, when the person has like the two ribbons that are hanging from the ceiling, and they climb up the ribbons and then they do twists and stuff and turns and stuff, and then they come back down. That's kind of what I'm seeing when I'm searching for aerial gyms.
Yeah, I sort of read it as like an aerial gymnastics in a way. Like it's very, a little bit trapeze, a little bit gymnasticy, but all very up in the similar. Air. Kind of, yeah, exactly. Anyway, okay, so at least a third of those followers are friends and people from my local Ariel's gym where I attend. In 2021, I started posting aerial-related comics in my stories, tagging the gym, instructors, students, and they've become extremely popular. A friend said I should make a zine or a book of collected aerial-related comics, but I felt like it would be inappropriate at my number of followers to crowdfund. So I took pre-orders through a big cartel shop I set up instead. It ended up being very popular. 10 volumes sold on the first run, 7 of the second print run I'm doing now. People are clamoring for a second volume in late 2023 with any new comics. My question is, with this resounding itty-bitty success, would it be appropriate to use a crowdfund site next time? It still feels like I'm asking too much with the crowd I have to do something big, like use Kickstarter for a project of this size. Brad, what is your thoughts about this? Side project, niche audience or niche audience. Right. I never get that right. Is it niche or niche? Go ahead, correct me.
I've always said niche, but I actually think both are acceptable. I think if we look this up, they're both acceptable pronunciations.
It's probably the case where like the English and the French say niche and Americans are like, hell with that. I'm calling it niche. It's a niche. Okay, so a niche audience, a short run of big cartel sold books or zines, I guess I should say. About 450 audience overall. What would you recommend about using crowdfunding?
Well, there's one word use there that's tripping me up because she references 10 volumes. Now, a volume is I think she means books. Yeah. Not 10 volumes.
Let's just say units. 10 units sold. Right. I think that's what she's trying to say.
We're talking she's sold 17 books.
Yes.
Right. Which obviously isn't a lot. And now she's being asked to do more. And of course, you know how tempting that is when somebody actually asks you, hey, we'd like another book.
Sure.
You know what I've always said about the T-shirt. You know, the first person to say, hey, I'd buy that on a T-shirt is the first person to disappear when the T-shirt comes out. So you've got to temper that a little bit. But you know how exciting it is when somebody actually asks for what you're looking for. With these numbers, I'm not going to, if you wanted to do another one where you took pre-orders and then did a limited press print run, it sounds like with those numbers, you're probably doing print on demand or using a digital printer to do a very low number of books. If you wanted to keep doing that, I wouldn't cast aspersions on you because we're talking about very, very small numbers at this point. What I would say, though, is at some point, I want you to take that step and to put a Kickstarter out there anyway, just to see and to prove to yourself, number one, if you can do it, and give yourself the chance for a bigger success. Because again, if it doesn't go, it doesn't go. It doesn't, it's not going to leave a lasting mark on you that you're going to have to live with. There's lots of people who have done Kickstarters that haven't funded. And you just shrug and you go away, and the internet forgets about everything after 2 weeks. So no one's going to remember this, that you had a failed Kickstarter.
Yeah.
At some point, I would like you just to go through the exercise of finding somebody that would do a couple hundred of these books and find out what that would cost and see what it would take to make this happen, just to see if it does happen, just to see if you have one of those niche audiences that really is craving this kind of content. At some point, I want that for you. But right now, if you also said, "Nah, that's an awful lot of stuff for for something that may end in disappointment," you wanted to keep doing it this way, I would understand that too. 17 is not a lot of books. You're not gonna hurt anything by keeping this on what sounds to be probably a print on demand type of deal. I'd say if you're comfortable doing that, and if this is something that you're just doing as a lark, I'd be okay with that too.
Yeah, I largely agree with Brad, and I'll give you some numbers that might help in your decision making, which is that your financials will largely stay the same. By financials, I mean the cost of goods sold for the book that you're producing.
Yeah,
will largely stay the same unless you go to a 4-color offset print, right?
Right.
And for that, and Brad can correct me if he thinks it's a different number, I would say you would need at least a run of 1,000 or so books. Brad, would you say 1,000 or so is about the minimum?
I would have said 500, but 1,000 is also very good in terms of bringing that cost, that unit cost down.
Yeah.
1,000 is probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, 500. The only reason I said 1,000 is 500. You could do it, but the setup cost for the machine, the setup cost for the printer, their physical time, sometimes it costs you just as much to print 1,000 as it does to print 500. Honestly, it's like another 10 cents a book to add another 500 on there. So anyway, what I'm getting at is unless you think you're going to get to like somewhere between 500 to 1,000, you're probably going to keep doing digital printing or print on demand or something like that. So your financials won't change that much. So there's that side of thing. And then I will say that on the Kickstarter side of things, there's no minimum or required floor that Kickstarter needs or that is socially acceptable. That they're only kickstarting for $500. How absurd! We won't let them on the platform. Kickstarter gets it. The world gets it. That not everything is going to be a Brandon Sanderson $40 million project.
Right.
Some things are just going to be a small. Let's see if we can do it. And I, as a friend, would advise you that if you kickstart it, you might find that you can get more energy behind this than you could ever get with pre-orders. And I'll tell you why. You can make this a go-to event for everyone in the aerial gym community. Because I imagine if you found this gym when you moved to the city that you were in, there's at least 4 or 5 people in your current gym that used to go to a gym in Detroit or Chicago or New York, or they had college buddies that also did aerial gymnastics. And I bet the word could get out. You'd be like, hey, gang, I'd really appreciate you spreading the word to any other gyms that you went to in the past. You might be able to jump from 17 to 100. What I'm getting at is you might surprise yourself by having that 30-day a guidepost of a Kickstarter to really push it and see if you can get the word out. This might be a way of growing your overall audience for what is arguably still a niche comic. But, there's got to be 5,000 to 15,000 people in America that are attending some form of aerial gym in North America, I would imagine. And this is just me grabbing numbers out of a hat, right? Like completely out of a hat. But let's say you could own and control that market in terms of the niche market of comics about aerial gyms. Holy hell, if every aerial gym could be made aware of it, that's fantastic. That's something you might want to shoot for in a 30-day Kickstarter campaign. And
again, it's not going to, there's no there's no lasting impact. If it doesn't go, it doesn't go.
Yeah, if it doesn't go, it doesn't go.
And Dave's right. One thing, we just got done talking about discoverability. That's one thing Kickstarter does extremely well is discoverability. And you'll find that you're reaching a whole lot of other aerial gym enthusiasts through the Kickstarter platform in general. So it's not a bad thing. Again, when you're ready for it, it's something I want to really encourage you to do. Because take the chance. There's nothing. There's no downside here.
There's no downside.
Taking a chance is a good thing.
And often you hear me say on the show that you want your career, and granted, this is a side hustle, so I get that, but let's just say you want your side hustle to be slowly but increasing, manageably sized mistakes. I always say you want it to be ever bigger, manageably sized mistakes. So you've rolled the dice and you made your first volumes and your first, book unit or zine unit, whatever you want to describe it as. Great. And you got it out physically, hand-to-hand sales, probably, I'm sure. Awesome. That's even better. So you've practiced the art of the sale, of the pitch, how to get it into those people's hands. That's awesome, too. The next step is maybe go for a slightly wider audience. And I think think that a Kickstarter 30-day campaign might be a fun, manageably sized mistake because, as Brad said, even if it goes wrong, oh no, you needed to get to 100 people and you only got to 80. Well, now you'll say, you know what, in your last update, gang, I'm going to do it anyway, maybe. So reach out to me on my Big Cartel site. Here's the book. You can order it right now. How about that?
Yeah.
Even in failure, you can make it a success.
And not for nothing, but like I would like to see a Kickstarter that does a few hundred of these, just because I could easily see a very simple outreach to different aerial gyms that says, hey, would you like to sell this book at your gym? Sell it to them for 65% off the cover price, to the extent where you're still making a profit, right? And I'm not talking about taking it on commission.
No, don't do commission.
Or taking it on what's that other word that I'm looking for? But anyway, sell it to them for cheap so they can sell it on retail. Yep. And just see what happens, because you could easily find a whole mailing list of aerial gyms, send them a quick comment and say, hey, would you like to sell this book on your store? If you printed the book for $10 and you sell it to them for $15 and they sell it to their customers for $20, just putting numbers off the top of my head, that's a win-win, right? Yeah, they're making money on the sale. You're making money on the sale. You're getting that stuff out there. And it's tailor-made for these aerial gyms who might want a little point of purchase sale thing that would be kind of nice for them. It'd be kind of neat to see if you could make that happen.
And not for nothing, it might be fun to kickstart it for 30 days. Like as you said before, this is a side hustle, and this is also a passion of yours in your life, the aerial gym, which, by the way, how fun. But, you know, at the end of your days, won't you be happy that you tried it? Like, that seems like that could be a fun thing. Like, yeah, I kickstarted a really small run book, because you use the word appropriate when you're talking about, is it appropriate to use crowdfunding? And I'll tell you, the only way to test whether something is appropriate for crowdfunding is to crowdfund it. Yep. I've seen all sorts of things be crowdfunded that you or I might be like, well, that's not appropriate to kickstart. Who cares? Right. If enough people backed it, that's all that mattered. It went, and that's fine. Yeah.
The only thing, I'll just put a button on this real quick. The word I was looking for was consignment, and I'm gonna suggest you not go into consignment. We hear all the time from pro-am comics artists that are like, I'm selling my comic at the comic shop on consignment. This is so great. I'm selling on consignment. I've got news for you. Other than Amazon, which unfortunately is also consignment. Consignment doesn't work at these brick and mortar shops, because what always ends up happening, basically, when consignment is, you give them the book, you get paid if they sell it. But then what you got to do is you got to keep coming back week after week after week saying, did you sell it yet? Did you sell it yet? Did you sell it yet? Because they just took 1 or 2 copies out of you, and they really don't care about getting back in touch with you if they did sell it. And in so many times, what ends up happening is that people just end up giving the books away because they got tired of asking month after month if it got sold yet. Right. Yeah. So don't do consignment. That's in my experience. And by the way, I'm one of those people. In my experience, it's never a good idea. Sell it to them for a discount. Let them resell it retail. And again, you've got a built-in audience there. It's almost like as Machiavellian, my Machiavellian business side, it's almost too good to pass up. Like when something is lined right up like that, you just go out to all the aerial gyms and offer them this book. It's a little bit too tempting for me to not give you a little bit of a push in that direction.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Okay, Brad. Well, we've got an update on previous discussions about both social media and about New Yorker cartooning. So let me jump in with this one. It comes in, it says, "Hi, Brad and Dave. Not a question, but a data point to your ongoing critique of social media platforms. After several years of submitting to the New Yorker, I'm proud to have sold a few single panel cartoons.
Yeah.
I was eagerly awaiting publication in the magazine with the expectation that my followers on Instagram would skyrocket when the cartoon was in print and shared on New Yorker's various channels, Instagram, Twitter, etc.,
Right.
which would have millions of followers. After some experience with this, I can say that a cartoon in the New Yorker produces 10 to 20 followers on Instagram. What's been more productive in terms of increasing followers has been engaging with the other New Yorker cartoonists through sharing and posting of each other's work.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your insights on the podcast." So, Brad, I think this goes to a lot of things that we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks in terms of it's a marathon, not a sprint, in terms of how to grow social media. But also, I think it speaks to how traditional media platforms, as lovely as it is to get printed in them or to get, to find your way onto their pages or onto their paper, they're not set up to grow your audience. They're set up to move their product.
Right. Yeah. But listen, first of all, getting printed in the New Yorker is still a big achievement. I think I'd love to get printed in the New Yorker. They're not looking for my stuff. So first of all, take a moment to feel good about that. That
Absolutely.
That's a very, very small circle of people that get to be printed in the New Yorker. So you should feel good about that achievement. And also it's hidden down there at the end, but it's something that I've got to keep reminding myself about. And maybe it's worth reminding you. Here's the best part of that whole thing. What's been most productive in terms of increasing followers has been engaging with other New Yorker cartoonists and sharing and posting each other's work. In other words, the social part of social media. Right. If you're like me, you get into these jags where you're like, I've been posting my stuff and nobody cares. It's Friday and I'm not famous yet. I've been posting and posting and posting. And what the 4 C's of social media reminds us is that it's not just about posting your work. And what this person's saying is that being social on social media actually brought him the greatest returns. Not being printed in the New Yorker, not being featured on the New Yorker's social media platforms and their social media outreach, but being social helped him on social media. That's the biggest takeaway of all this. Is that, and I say that as much for me as for anybody else, because I got to keep reminding myself, is that the social part, the commenting, the sharing, all of that stuff that the 4 C's talk to us about is really what gives us traction on social media.
Yeah. And again, it is not something that is an overnight success on social media. And increasingly, it's something that I would view with a tentative heart, because even if you build up that audience on Twitter, what's happening with Twitter long term? What's happening with Reddit long term as it goes public? What's happening with Instagram as Facebook continues to dwindle in its effectiveness? So all of them are a slow marathon-like pace, not an overnight success. But listen, I want you to know you're not alone in thinking, if I do X, then Y will be the result in my cartooning, right? Yeah. I have had many of those moments. And so you are not alone, first of all, that you're like, if I get into the New Yorker, then immediate gold car. In this case, the gold car being like social media, flood.
Right.
So I want you to know that you're not alone in that. I do that to myself all the time and continuously, even after 25 years of cartooning, that if I just get, to me, my current one is, and I know how stupid it is someday I'll win an Eisner. And when I get an Eisner, then all the doors will open for me. And I know that's not the case. I know it's not the case. But
I know.
I'm saying this as a flawed human, that I'm saying I still have that somewhere in the back of my head that if I win an Eisner, by God, the doors are going to open. I've seen it too many times. That movie doesn't play. The doors don't immediately open. So what does work though is slow, consistent, continuous, ever improving quality work that you're putting out as a marathon, not as a sprint. So this is another example. But I do want to ask Brad, because I'm sort of fascinated by this, how our teen and 20-year-old versions would be so flummoxed that of all the publications we grew up with, The New Yorker is the last one standing for comics.
Yeah. I mean, there was growing up, there were 3 and maybe 4 if you'd count like back in the day, the Saturday Evening Post.
4, but also you could conceivably sell standalones to your local newspaper if you did it long enough.
Yeah.
So you also had that as an outlet. Yeah.
Yeah, but the big ones that everybody shot for was Playboy magazine, which was great for buying cartoons and paid top dollar. Yes. The New Yorker and Mad Magazine, right? Those were the 3 triumvirate. Right. Maybe Saturday Evening Post. And well, Playboy magazine doesn't publish cartoons anymore. And Mad Magazine, I don't even think is publishing anymore. I think they've pretty much come to a halt, or they're doing archive stuff, or I don't know what they're doing. But I don't think they're buying comics anymore. So that leaves the New Yorker. And it's the same as what you were saying with your caveat there, is that, well, you can sell them to your local newspaper, but it's not as possible as it was back in the day to build a career doing that, because they're not paying top dollar. They're not paying great. And a lot of them aren't even buying. That leaves the New Yorker. Yeah. Right. It's just amazing that they were kind of, for comics, for freelance cartoonists, they're the last one standing.
They're the last one standing. And it's weird how, in my own heart, I'm just being honest about this too, I would still also love to get into the New Yorker, because it's one of the last remaining comics places where my parents still know what the New Yorker is. You know, like they know that I'm vaguely on the internet, but they also know that a lot of other nonsense is on the internet. So they're like, But the New Yorker would still feel special in a non-monetary way, you know?
Yeah. No, it still got that gravitas. It's still got that street appeal where, your parents, your neighbors, you show up at the next softball game and your wife is in the stands saying, yeah, well, we had a nice week. Then we had to go down and pick up a copy of the New Yorker to see Brad's new cartoon. And, that still has significance.
I want to pause the conversation, because in this imagined scenario, Brad was doing something physical. Did everybody notice that? Brad was playing in a softball league, which, okay, hold on. This dream scenario is now encompassing all sorts of fantasy versions of Brad.
Yes. I'm playing shortstop. And just on the way to the game, I picked up a copy of the New Yorker to see my comic. And I probably hit a home run that day, too.
Oh, by the way, the chest is 42 inches at last measurement. Like his tailor had to take his suits out because he's building up so much muscle mass. He's running a sub 8 mile. It's amazing. Brad's in incredible shape in this dream.
And that's the chest measurement. Usually that 44 inches is about 8 inches down. That's my waist.
I mean, I gotta tell you, his chin is more jutting. He's got a rugged tan. In this dream scenario, Brad's wife is just beaming from the stands because he's in the New Yorker. He's playing amazing softball, by the way. Just incredible turns at shortstop. Yeah. So really, I want to know that, Brad.
We got to stop on our cabin over there on Floyd Lake in East Tawas, Michigan, where we can stop, and we're going to spend a week up there on the way back. And it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
And just to complete this image of this fantasy Brad, that Brad has a transmission that works. And the goddamn Mazda's not breaking down every 3 weeks. All right.
Now I think I like that better than shortstop.
So let me jump back to, because I haven't talked, I'll be honest, I haven't talked to a New Yorker cartoonist since before the pandemic.
Wow.
But if memory serves, the rate used to be about $800 when you sold to the New Yorker, unless you were Roz Chast, and then you'd get like $1,500 or $2,000 a comic, that kind of thing. But if you're just starting in, but the weird thing about the New Yorker is you had to give them 50, 60, 70, 100, 150 comics before they would buy that first $800 cartoon.
Yeah.
So, you and I, didn't we talk at one point that you and I were going to try to do the New Yorker? Like we would do it together.
Yeah. We were going to do it as a team and see if we could come up with stuff together.
But then we realized we would literally be leaving thousands of dollars on the table by trying to get one $800 cartoon sold versus just doing our own stuff.
But, as opposed to, and eventually, I guess you could catch up because you could go back and publish all the comics that they said no to.
Yes.
But there would be this big lag that neither one of us wanted to go through of creating stuff that we're not putting anywhere. And meanwhile, all that time that we're spending doing that, we're not spending doing things like Sheldon Drive, Evil Inc. After Dark, all the stuff that's bringing the money in. Right. We're not doing that, and it's like I don't have time to play games for the off chance that and then it was like, okay, what's the big win here? The big win is that you get a comic published in the New Yorker, and maybe you'll get one next month, but then there's no guarantee on that either. Right.
No. But I do feel like once you've broken the seal of getting one in, I feel like the likelihood of getting a second, third, fourth, fifth one is much higher. I would feel
once you make that relationship with the editor. Yeah.
And I have to say, to the credit of the new comics editor at the New Yorker, who I have not met, she seems to be doing a great job of bringing in new voices, because it was a little bit stale for a while in terms of it was always a Roz Chast cartoon, always a Corin cartoon. And then it's like four people that you've seen since the 70s. And it seems like there's newer voices now. Yeah,
and that's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
So with a firm congratulations to our Comic Lab backer, who is published in the New Yorker and probably plays a very mean second base as well.
Oh, God.
Let's go to another Comic Lab Patreon backer who says this. Hey, Brad and Dave, later this year, my family plans on moving, which means we will be very busy with packing, cleaning, buying, selling, etc. I'm thinking it may be necessary to take a break from actively working on my comic for a few months in order to take care of everything that needs to be done. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah. What do you recommend during that period in order to keep my writing and drawing skills fresh until I'm ready to start back up again? Is there anything else you would recommend for taking a planned break from comics? Thanks as always, Dave. Our friend here is going through a huge life experience, moving houses. What's our advice?
Well, first of all, Brad, do I have it right by half remembering that a move is emotionally equated sometimes with the emotional brunt of bearing a death in the family in terms of how badly it can hit you sometimes?
As a matter of fact, there are 5 most stressful things in life. I don't know that they've got a ranking, but the 5 most stressful things in life is the death of a loved one, a divorce, moving, a major illness or injury, and a job loss. And also, technically, depending on which psychological textbooks you look at, number 6 is not doing well at shortstop. That's number 6.
I didn't see it coming. God damn it. It's so rare that you can completely come out of left field. Hey-oh, but and get me. That's amazing.
But yeah, this is a major life stress moment that our friend is going through.
I think between Brad and I most recently did a move. I did one about 4.5 years ago.
I did one just before COVID.
Yeah, I will say this in a way that I think everyone can relate to. About 4 weeks ago, I unpacked the final box. And I'm not joking. It was about 4 years later. I unpacked the final. It was in a downstairs hallway closet way up in the top corner that I couldn't reach. And you know what it had? It had bullshit in it. It had absolute bullshit in it.
Stuff you should have thrown away in the first place.
I should have just given it away 4 years ago. I was so mad. Anyway, so I have a lot of thoughts on this, actually. Yeah. One is that I think we do ourselves a disservice if we force ourselves to create even through trying times.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, there are people for whom the cartooning can be a wonderful therapy to distract them from a death in the family or a divorce or a job loss or a move. So I get that. I'm not saying that for some people it isn't therapeutic. I'm saying there are moments in life for which you just have to acknowledge I am going through a human moment. I am not a super person. I can't do everything in this. the best thing I can do to honor this moment is to as efficiently and quickly process through this move. And by that, I would actually argue, and as much as I did unpack the final box 4 years ago, when you do move in, try to get as much as you can unpacked right away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as quickly get back to a normal life as you can, because psychologically, my previous move to this, it dwindled like slowly over the course of 3 or 4 years, the boxes. And I got to tell you, just power it out as much as you can within a week or two of the move, because it's so much better. But that being said, don't kill yourself, because there are just moments that you just have to honor that you are not a super person. You don't have to be creative in every single day of your life.
And as long as we're giving our listeners pats on the back, let's give this person a pat on the back, because when I first saw that question come through, I thought it was going to be, how do I keep posting my comic on the web as I'm going through this move? Right. But they're not saying that. He's not saying that. He's saying, how do I keep my skills fresh? He says, I know I'm going to have to take a break.
Right.
And I thought we were going to have to talk him down and say, listen, unless this comic is a major, significant part of your revenue, right? Unless you're making significant revenue and income from it, you gotta just stop posting on the web and do this, be present for this. And we're not having that conversation. He knows that he can't post this stuff on the web right now. So pat on the back for that, for being that evolved to a point that maybe I wouldn't have been at that same period of time, right?
Yeah.
So good for you for doing that. Number one. Number two, the best thing you can do. Okay, let's take writing and drawing. I'll take writing and you take drawing. How's this sound?
Okay, that sounds great.
For writing, here's my advice to you. Moving and packing, the act of packing and moving has so much story potential to it that I want you to be completely focused on it. And here's what I mean. When you're moving everything, you're basically taking stuff that you probably haven't looked at for 5, 10, 15 years, right? And the only reason it's in your hand now is because you're putting it in a box and you haven't paid attention. Really, maybe you should be throwing some of that stuff away, like we were saying, instead of paying to put it in a box and then take it out. But you're doing a review of your whole life there. That thing that you haven't picked up for 15 years. Take a minute and just be in that moment, right? Think about the stuff that you're putting in those boxes. Think about, that this thing, this old softball jersey from when you actually did play softball and you were actually able to move without looking like a lumbering sloth. If you're like me. Think about that as you're folding it up there and putting it away, and think about just the organizing of your life and the assembling and disassembling and being there for your partner and for your kids and so forth as they're going through those same things, and say, hey, look, Joey, look what I found. That's Mr. Snuggles, your teddy bear from when you were 3 years old. We haven't even thought about this thing. I'll throw it in the trash. See what you think about that. We don't need this shit around. That family moment that you can have with your kids. In all seriousness, be there. And then what I want you to do is get a little book, a little notebook, a little something. And at night, because if you after all this activity, you're going to be just wore out. I remember when we were packing up our house, I was just sore all over. So take some time, sit down with a nice, tasty beverage and write down your thoughts about what happened. What'd you find? What'd you pack? What does it make you remember? Does it bring back a story? Did this thing happen? Did that thing happen? Write down as much as you can about what you're going through. And that's going to turn you. Having this moment to reevaluate your life and to do a little review and a little remembering is all going to turn into good story stuff, right? Not maybe right now, but have it all written down so later on you can go back and look at that with a new perspective and say, oh, yeah, I remember when I threw out Mr. Snuggles. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe that's a good example of what not to do in parenting. I'll write a story about that. This is your time to build up that bank of story ideas you got going on. And it's okay to be fallow for a little while. It's okay to have that part on pause. But write it down so you don't miss it and so you don't forget it. And then come back to that later. I'll bet you find all kinds of great story ideas in it.
Yeah, I will. First of all, I know my job is going to be to talk about art, but I will second what Brad said, which is, you have sort of a bank account while you're going fallow, and you're sort of paying into it with this moment. There's all sorts of experiences, memories, archives of past versions of yourself that you're going to be going through with your boxes. You're like, oh, I remember these hopes and dreams. And it's like Brad putting the softball glove into the box, packing it up where it'll still sit for 10 years, more. But you'll remember, you'll be pulling out yearbooks. You'll be pulling out old things that you haven't thought about. You forgot you ever had it. Oh my gosh. Or photographs and all that sort of stuff. But all of that triggers sort of creativity cycles and Brad captured it perfectly, which is write them down, journal them, because I don't tend to do storylines anymore in Sheldon, but back when I did, and back when I was moving, my move, I know, because I can think of them right offhand, created at least 3 storylines in Sheldon that I used directly from the move. One was a storyline about moving, right? I used all of that. All the jokes about tape and boxes and bullshit and all that sort of stuff that happens during a move, I turned it into comics, because those are the experiential moments that become the bank account that you can pull from in the future for future ideas. So Brad's right on target. Now I'll talk about art.
Yeah. And
I will say this, that a move is one of those times where your drawing hand is physically getting beaten up. It's not the right time to draw. You're using major muscle groups. You're lifting. Your hand feels like a claw by the end of the day after moving a bunch of boxes.
Yeah.
If you're like every human that ever existed, you're not lifting with your legs, you're lifting with your back. So you're probably torquing your back and throwing it out a little bit. So you're not in the right physical space to be hunched over a drawing board, right? And you already know this already by the way you're asking a question. This is not the right time to draw.
Right.
But what I will say is, in the times where I have stepped away from my drawing desk, and for me, the most prominent one was when we were doing the editing on my documentary Stripped, which took about 6 to 8 months of really intensive editing. It takes a long time to edit a documentary. Anyway, I had to basically put my cartooning on hold in order to get this film done. Yeah. And I kind of stopped drawing for about 8 months, which was the first time in 15, 20 years that I had stopped drawing. And what I found, and what I think you will find in coming back to drawing after this move is over, you will discover new ways of drawing because you've a little bit forgotten the patterns that you were stuck in with your drawing.
Yeah.
So it's like a bike. Don't be worried that you're going to forget how to draw. That's not what I'm saying. Is your hand will find new pathways to walk down because it hasn't been continuously drawing. It's stepped away. And there's something sort of wonderful about that. I found it to be actually a really breakthrough moment in my drawing. I can point to the 6 months after my film wrapped was a really experimental time of me saying, well, why couldn't I do washes in my comic? Or why couldn't I do increasing hash marks that I've never done before? Or why, a different way of lettering? I tried all of that in the 6 months because it felt new again. It felt fresh again. It was sort of like a second birth. And I really enjoyed it for that reason.
Yeah. And that is something that I'm glad we talk about here, because it's something that happens to everybody. And it happened to me too, where when you take a little bit of a break, even if it's like a week vacation where you're not drawing, that first day back at the drawing desk is always a little bit frustrating, because it's like, I forgot how to do all of this in a week. You feel like your hand belongs to somebody else and you can't make it move right. And it's like, this is terrible. I've been doing this for nearly 30 years and I forgot how to draw. But that's actually a good thing for the reasons that Dave sets out. And that is, it gives you a chance to rethink how you're doing things, and it will come back to you. It's like riding a bike. But man, that first day is tough.
The first day is tough. And to quote Brad back at Brad, what happens is you go like, how did I do this? I know I used to do it XYZ way. How did I do that? And what happens is you start asking in a way that you never did before, the why behind the what. Yeah. Why did I set up my files this way? Right. Why did I use this specific kind of pen? Why did I scan it this way and not that way? Why did I have that resolution? And what's great is it sort of makes you revisit the entire way you do your comics in a way that I found to be really enlivening after a decade and a half of cartooning. I was like, it sort of gave me an excuse to do a fresh revisit, Brad, on why I was doing things the way I was doing them. Yeah. And was there a better way to do them?
Yeah, so this is a great time in your life, right? You can absolutely. This is going to be a wonderful opportunity to recharge your creative batteries, and come back at that comic fresh and strong. It's going to be. Listen, sometimes being away from something for a little bit of time will make it so much better when you come back, and you're giving yourself that opportunity. And listen, we're giving ourselves that opportunity because we're going to go away for a week, but we'll be back after another 7 days. We'll be back right back here sharing comics, stories, tips, tutorials, and advice because you'll be listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, and we know that you do, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, where we are burning up the podcast chart.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Is it sad that Brad's fantasy is about being a good softball player?
And my wife up in the stands adoringly watch as I trot the bases, cheering, just cheering me on as I come up to bat, and just she's got nothing else better to do but to watch me in my and by the way, Dave, my softball uniform fits perfectly. Like it's tight in all the right places, and I look like a dream up there.
And ladies and gents, let me just say, in every way that matters, he is glistening with sweat. Oh, it's
glistening.
Perfect. Just the right touch. Now, I'm going to be honest. It's a little bit of a wet t-shirt contest for Brad. That sports jersey is revealing every ripple of those muscles. That six-pack it's on display, and the crowd is loving it. They are eating it up. And his wife is up there saying, no, hands off. That one's mine. Yeah. And Brad looks up with a wink and just says, and I sold the comic to the New Yorker.